The kitchen fell into a silence so profound that for the first time in MasterChef history, you could hear the gentle hum of the overhead lights. Maya Chen stood at Station 7, her hands moving in graceful, precise gestures as she communicated in American Sign Language with her interpreter. But when she turned toward Gordon Ramsay and signed a message that would change everything, the silence took on a different quality entirely. "Thank you for believing that deaf doesn't mean less capable," the interpreter translated, her voice breaking slightly. "You gave me a chance when others wouldn't." Gordon Ramsay, who had spent 30 years in professional kitchens where communication was everything, felt his chest tighten as he watched this 26-year-old chef who had just proven that the most important conversations happen without words, and that the purest gratitude is expressed through the language of the heart. The cameras kept rolling, but this was no longer about culinary competition. This was about a young woman who had spent her entire life communicating through touch, sight, and an intuitive understanding of rhythm and vibration, and what happened when her unique perspective on the world transformed everyone's understanding of what it meant to truly hear what food was trying to say. It started as the most emotionally charged semifinal in MasterChef history. 5 contestants remained after months of grueling challenges, each one representing a different path to culinary excellence. The kitchen gleamed under studio lights, every surface polished to television perfection. Gordon Ramsay stood at the center with an intensity that suggested this challenge would separate the good cooks from the great ones. "Today's challenge," Gordon announced, his voice carrying across the kitchen, "is about communication. I want you to create a dish that tells a story, your story, without using any words. Let your food speak for itself." 5 contestants nodded, each mentally cataloging the emotional connections and personal narratives they wanted to express through their cooking. Among them stood Maya Chen, 26 years old, wearing her chef's whites with quiet confidence, her dark eyes alert and focused in a way that suggested she was processing information on multiple levels simultaneously. Maya had been profoundly deaf since birth, but what struck everyone who met her wasn't what she couldn't hear. It was how completely she seemed to understand everything happening around her. She read lips with remarkable accuracy, communicated through graceful sign language, and most importantly, had developed an almost supernatural ability to feel the vibrations and rhythms that other cooks missed entirely. Her interpreter, Sarah, stood just outside the cooking area, ready to translate when needed, but Maya had made it clear during casting that she preferred to communicate directly whenever possible, using her voice for simple phrases and relying on sign language only when precision was essential. "You have 2 hours," Gordon continued, making sure to face Maya directly so she could read his lips clearly, "to create a 3-course meal that represents who you are as a chef. Your time starts now." 4 contestants immediately sprinted toward the pantry, their minds racing through complex preparations and sophisticated techniques. Maya moved more deliberately, but with unmistakable purpose, her eyes scanning the ingredients with the focus of someone who had learned to gather more information through sight than most people gathered through all their senses combined. She selected ingredients that seemed to follow a theme: fresh seafood, bright vegetables, delicate herbs, and components that suggested she was building something that would showcase texture and visual beauty as much as flavor. But as Maya gathered her elements, something in her expression suggested she was thinking about more than just the food. She was planning a conversation. "What's your strategy today, Maya?" Gordon asked as he made his rounds, positioning himself directly in her line of sight so she could read his lips. Maya's face lit up with enthusiasm. "I want to show that cooking is like sign language, chef," she said, her voice carrying the slight inflection common to those who have never heard spoken language but have worked hard to master verbal communication. "Every ingredient is like a word. Every technique is like grammar. I want to create food that speaks even when I cannot hear it." Gordon nodded, intrigued by this perspective he'd never considered before. As Maya began cooking, something remarkable became apparent. While her technique was polished and professional, her approach was entirely unique. She placed her hand on her cutting board to feel the vibrations of her knife work, ensuring perfect rhythm and consistency. She touched the sides of her pans to gauge temperature, reading heat through her palms in ways that amazed the other contestants. "Behind you!" called James as he rushed past with a hot pan. Maya didn't hear the warning, but she felt the change in air movement and the vibration of his footsteps through the floor. She stepped aside smoothly, turned, and offered James a smile and a thumbs up that seemed to brighten the entire kitchen. 30 minutes into the challenge, Maya was preparing what appeared to be a sophisticated seafood course, but Gordon noticed she was doing more than just cooking. She was creating what looked like edible art, arrangements that were visually stunning, but also seemed designed to be experienced through touch and texture as much as taste. "Maya," Gordon said, positioning himself where she could see him clearly, "your plating is extraordinary. Tell me about your approach." Maya paused in her work, her hands still moving gracefully as she explained through a combination of speech and sign language, with Sarah translating the more complex parts. "I think about food the way I think about signing chef," Maya explained. "Every element has to be clear and purposeful. The colors have to contrast so they can be read visually. The textures have to tell different parts of the story." Maya gestured toward her developing plate. "When I sign, I use space and movement to create meaning. When I cook, I use placement and contrast to create conversations between flavors." Gordon watched as Maya continued her preparation, and he began to understand that he was witnessing something unprecedented. This wasn't just adapted cooking. This was cooking that had been elevated by a completely different way of experiencing the world. 60 minutes remaining," Gordon announced, making sure Maya could see him clearly. Maya was building her second course now, and her unique approach continued to amaze everyone watching. She seasoned by texture as much as taste, feeling the grains of salt and pepper between her fingers, understanding how different sizes and shapes of crystals would affect both flavor and mouthfeel. When she tasted her developing sauce, her expression showed a concentration that was almost meditative. She was parsing flavor components not just through taste, but through the way they felt on her palate, the way they interacted with different parts of her mouth, the way they created what she described as flavor landscapes that she could map spatially. "This is incredible," whispered James to another contestant. "She's cooking like she can see things the rest of us can't see." Indeed, Maya's dishes were developing with a precision and artistry that seemed to transcend normal cooking methods. Her proteins were cooked perfectly, her vegetables showed ideal texture, and her sauces demonstrated balance that spoke to an almost intuitive understanding of flavor development. 30 minutes remaining. Maya began plating her final course, and this was where her unique perspective truly shone. While other contestants focused primarily on visual appeal, Maya was creating plates that were designed to be experienced multi-sensorily. Her arrangements created textural contrasts that would be as important as flavor contrasts. Her use of temperature, warm proteins against cool garnishes was clearly strategic, designed to create experiences that would engage every sense available to her diners. But perhaps most remarkably, Maya was plating with a kind of architectural precision that suggested she understood food composition in ways that went beyond traditional culinary training. 15 minutes remaining. As the challenge entered its final phase, the kitchen energy became intense. Maya remained focused, making final adjustments to her three courses with the same methodical grace she'd shown throughout the challenge. But then something unexpected happened. Maya stepped back from her completed dishes and did something that surprised everyone. She closed her eyes, placed her hands flat on the counter, and seemed to be feeling for something, vibrations, rhythm, some kind of feedback that only she could detect. When she opened her eyes, she was smiling. Not the relieved smile of someone who had finished a difficult task, but the satisfied smile of someone who had just confirmed that everything was exactly as it should be. Time! Hands up! Step back! Maya stepped back from 3 plates that looked like they belonged in the finest restaurants in the world. Each dish was visually stunning, but more than that, they seemed to have been created with an understanding of composition and balance that transcended normal plating techniques. The judging began, and Gordon approached Maya's station with the other judges. Even before tasting, it was clear that something special had been created here. Maya's first course was a crudo that showcased perfect knife work and ingredient selection. The fish was pristine, the accompaniments were precisely balanced, and the overall composition created visual harmony that was genuinely artistic. Gordon took his first bite, and his expression changed immediately. The flavors were extraordinary, but there was something else, a completeness, a harmony that spoke to understanding flavor on levels that most cooks never achieved. Each component contributed to a whole that was greater than the sum of its parts. Maya, Gordon said, making sure she could see his lips clearly, this is exceptional. The balance is perfect, the technique is flawless, and the flavors are beautifully integrated. Maya's face showed quiet pride, but also genuine curiosity about Gordon's full assessment. Gordon moved to the second course, a perfectly cooked piece of fish with vegetables that had been prepared to showcase different textures and temperatures. Again, the execution was flawless, but there was something else that Gordon was struggling to articulate. The way you've composed these plates, Gordon continued, it's like you're thinking about food in 3 dimensions, considering how every element interacts not just with flavor, but with texture, temperature, even the way they're positioned relative to each other. Maya nodded enthusiastically. Food is like signing in space, chef, she explained, through a combination of speech and sign language. Every element has to be placed purposefully, and the relationships between elements create the meaning. Gordon tasted the final course, a dessert that was both technically sophisticated and emotionally satisfying. The flavors were complex but harmonious. The textures created a progression that told a story, and the overall experience was genuinely memorable. When Gordon finished tasting all 3 courses, he stood quietly for a moment, processing not just what he'd experienced, but what it meant. Maya, Gordon said finally, his voice softer than usual, in 30 years of professional cooking, I have never encountered someone who understands food composition the way you do. Maya waited attentively for Gordon to continue. Your dishes don't just taste extraordinary, Gordon explained. They communicate, they tell stories, they create experiences that engage senses that most cooks don't even think about. Gordon looked around at the other contestants, then back at Maya. You've shown us that great cooking isn't just about following techniques or even developing amazing palate, Gordon continued. You've shown us that great cooking is about understanding how to create complete sensory experiences. That's when Maya began to sign something to her interpreter, her hands moving with emotional intensity that was visible even to those who couldn't understand sign language. Sarah, the interpreter, watched Maya's hands and then spoke, her own voice thick with emotion. Thank you for believing that deaf doesn't mean less capable. You gave me a chance when others wouldn't. You saw my cooking before you saw my disability. That means everything to someone who has spent her whole life proving that different doesn't mean deficient. The kitchen fell completely silent. Several contestants began wiping their eyes. Even the usually composed camera operators seemed moved by the raw honesty of Maya's message. Gordon stared at Maya for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice carried an emotional weight that surprised everyone, including himself. Maya, Gordon said, making sure she could see every word clearly, you haven't proven that deaf doesn't mean less capable. You've proven that different perspectives create extraordinary results. Behind the scenes, Gordon made a decision that was unprecedented in MasterChef history. Gordon stepped away from the judges' table and walked directly to Maya. He gestured to ask if he could hug her, and when she nodded, he pulled her into an embrace that clearly meant more than professional recognition. When they stepped apart, Gordon's eyes were filled with tears. Maya, Gordon said, You've taught me something about cooking that I didn't know I needed to learn." Gordon turned to address the entire kitchen, including the cameras. "Ladies and gentlemen, what we've witnessed today is a masterclass in understanding that excellence comes from unique perspectives, not from conforming to traditional approaches." Gordon looked back at Maya, who was listening with the kind of attention that showed how much these words meant to her. "Maya, you're not just safe from elimination," Gordon announced. "You've earned something that I've never offered before, a guaranteed place in the finale, because you've shown us what cooking looks like when it transcends traditional limitations." The kitchen erupted in applause, but Maya felt the response through vibrations rather than sound. The stomping feet, the clapping hands, the way the floor seemed to pulse with positive energy. It was a standing ovation she could feel in her bones. But Gordon wasn't finished. "More than that," Gordon continued, "Maya, I want to offer you something. When this competition ends, I want you to come work with our culinary development team, not to accommodate your deafness, but because your perspective on food composition could revolutionize how we think about creating dining experiences." Maya's composed expression finally cracked. Tears began sliding down her cheeks as she processed what Gordon had just offered. She began signing rapidly, her emotions too complex for verbal expression. Sarah translated, "She says this is more than she ever dreamed possible. She says that cooking has always been her way of communicating with the world, and now the world is finally listening." What happened next was unlike anything in MasterChef history. The other contestants abandoned their own concerns about advancement and surrounded Maya, not with pity or awkward sympathy, but with genuine respect and admiration for someone who had just expanded their understanding of what cooking could be. "Maya, watching you work today changed how I think about plating," said James, making sure she could see his lips clearly. "The way you consider texture and temperature relationships. I've never thought about food that way before." "Your precision is incredible," added another contestant. "You make me realize how much I rely on hearing and how little I pay attention to the other information that's available." Gordon watched the group surrounding Maya and realized something profound about the nature of communication and understanding. "What we've learned today," Gordon announced to the entire kitchen, "is that great cooking isn't about following traditional methods. It's about bringing your unique perspective to food and using that perspective to create experiences that other people couldn't imagine." Gordon approached Maya one more time. "Maya, I want to ask you something," Gordon said, positioning himself where she could read his lips clearly. "What do you think your deafness has taught you about cooking that hearing chefs might miss?" Maya considered the question seriously, her face showing the thoughtful expression that appeared whenever she was asked to articulate her cooking philosophy. Through a combination of speech and sign language, with Sarah translating the more complex parts, Maya explained, "When you can't hear, you learn to feel everything. The vibrations of boiling water tell you about temperature better than watching bubbles. The way steam feels on your face tells you about moisture content. The way a pan vibrates when you stir tells you about consistency." Maya paused, gathering her thoughts. "But more than that, when you can't hear people talking, you learn to communicate through other things, facial expressions, body language, the care you put into your actions. Cooking became my way of having conversations with people who could hear." Maya's expression grew more intense as she continued, "I learned to cook like I was signing. Every movement purposeful, every element placed with intention, everything working together to create meaning that goes beyond words." The kitchen was completely silent as everyone processed these words. "So I think my deafness taught me that cooking is another language," Maya concluded, "and like sign language, it works best when every gesture is clear, purposeful, and comes from the heart." Gordon stood quietly for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that surprised everyone. "Maya," Gordon said, "in 30 years of professional cooking, I've never heard a more beautiful description of what we're supposed to be doing in the kitchen." The episode, when it aired, became more than television. Culinary schools began incorporating discussions about multi-sensory cooking alongside traditional training. Restaurants started hiring more diverse staff and adapting their training programs to accommodate different learning styles. The Culinary Institute of America invited Maya to develop a curriculum about alternative approaches to understanding food. But perhaps most importantly, the episode changed how people thought about disability and capability, about different ways of experiencing the world, and about the value of perspectives that challenge traditional assumptions. Maya went on to win the entire MasterChef competition, but by then the victory was almost secondary. She'd already proven something more valuable than winning a cooking show. She'd proven that excellence often comes from those who approach familiar challenges in completely unfamiliar ways. Today, Maya runs a culinary consulting business that helps restaurants create more inclusive dining experiences. Her cookbook, Cooking in Silence, a multi-sensory approach to food, became a bestseller and is now used in culinary schools worldwide to teach students about alternative ways of understanding cooking. Above her kitchen hangs a photo from that MasterChef episode. Maya with her three perfect dishes, Gordon with tears in his eyes, and the other contestants surrounding them both with genuine admiration and respect. Below the photo, a simple plaque in both English and ASL symbols. Great cooking is a conversation that transcends words. Because that's what Maya Chen taught everyone that day, that the most important conversations happen without sound, the most beautiful communication comes from the heart, and that sometimes the most profound insights come from those who experience the world differently than everyone else.